zone district. For example, USUA1 would be rezoned to USUA, etc. The proposed map amendment would not change any zoning requirements that apply to the rezoned properties. The new ADU law states restricts when the city can enforce the owner occupancy requirement, and it's only at the time of permitting. The proposed text amendment adjusts Denver's rules to comply with the state law. The update would still allow ADUs to be used even if the owner moved off the property. And before I conclude the presentation and get into the questions, just wanted to kind of show the map again, showing where ADUs are allowed today in green and where this project is proposing to allow them in orange. So as far as next steps, we anticipate starting the public adoption process at the beginning of September with a planning board public hearing on September 4th. After that, the project will move along to city council review through the committee process. And we aim to be at the city council public adoption hearing in mid-November. All of our dates, once confirmed, will be updated on our webpage. So please visit that if you want up-to-date information on those dates. And we encourage you to visit our webpage to send in questions and comments and to see the latest information. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and we will get into the Q&A.
Thank you, Justin. I do want to apologize. I did not start the recording at the beginning of this. The presentation that we started recording in the middle of is the exact same presentation as the previous town hall. And there weren't any questions that were asked or answered before this recording started. So apologies for the late recording. And thanks, Walter, for pointing that out. And thanks, Jenna, for putting the link to exactly where the recording is in the Q&A for the last town hall. So if you are accessing this after the fact, then you already know where to find this webinar and therefore where to find the first webinar. Thank you so much. And again, I apologize. And right now, we don't have any open questions. So I do want to encourage those who are here. We have a bunch of people online. And so please go to the Q&A function. And looks like we're already getting at least one question now. But please feel free to use the Q&A function. We'll answer some of them live. We'll also answer some of them over text as well. And that will also be available afterwards.
So for the group, can start posing some questions that we're seeing in the chat and then that we've been getting through our web form a lot. And so I see a question about density from Courtney. And, one of the things, we hear a lot about is why are we talking about density and folks feeling like their neighborhoods are already pretty full. And I just wondered, Councilman or Justin or others, what do you think about the potential benefits of ADUs versus some of the concerns around density?
I'm certainly happy to give a political answer. And if there are technical answers too, please do feel free to jump in. So from a political perspective, we are in a housing crisis here in our city, just as some other cities around the US, and our housing prices continue to go up a lot. And it is housing costs and housing prices are the single biggest concern facing Denverites today. And there are people making decisions to leave Denver and having their first reason why they're leaving Denver is because of housing costs. But to your point about how dense is too dense, I think it depends on the context of the neighborhood. So, for example, downtown, it does make sense to have large buildings. There's a new condominium building going up right now at 18th and Welton or 19th and Welton, and that will, once it is complete, will be the second largest condominium development in the city. And that's a great spot, as in downtown, for there to be large scale development. That doesn't make sense for it to be throughout the city. So even in District 10, I would say downtown is great for large buildings. Golden Triangle, maybe for medium-sized buildings. Congress Park is also close to the center city, and large buildings don't make any sense at all in Congress Park. The median or the average age of the house in Congress Park was built before 1940, as in more than half of the homes built in Congress Park were built before 1940. And it doesn't make any sense to demolish any of them, because it's just such a fabulous neighborhood with mature trees and a great community there. So one way that we can in neighborhoods like Congress Park help with the housing crisis is through gentle density or small density, and auxiliary dwelling units or accessory dwelling units or granny flats or whatever you'd like to call them. They are an option that would allow for a little bit of gentle density without overrunning our utilities, our streets, parking, traffic, et cetera. So there are certainly homeowners that are making the decision to get an ADU more because they want to have generational cohabitation, as in they want their parents or their kids to live near them, but not so close as in the same house. And that's a common use of ADUs in Denver. And then also there are people on fixed incomes, and so those folks want to make sure that they can plan for the future and afford to continue to live in the neighborhood they've lived in for years or decades. So there are a couple of reasons why ADUs make sense even in neighborhoods like Congress Park, and why larger density absolutely does not make any sense.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Hines. I was about to type an answer to Leah, hopefully is the right pronunciations, question in the Q&A, but I hit answer live, so let me just take care of it. So I can't figure out how to answer it by text now. What are the current size requirements for ADUs, and will they change at all with this proposal? So there is a maximum size for an accessory dwelling unit. It's either 864 square feet or 1,000 square feet, depending on the size of the lot, and they will not change at all as a result of this proposal. And so, ask another question for the group. So one of the things that saw in the Q&A was, that hearing a concern about the Denver Housing Authority program that Justin talked about, that that program is a great way to build affordable ADUs, because even though ADUs by their very nature tend to be a little less expensive, like as a rental than a larger house would be, even at the market rate, they could still be unaffordable to a lot of families. So that DHA program actually results in ADUs that are deed restricted, and so only income qualified residents could live in them. And that would be, for a period of, I think, about 25 years. And so there was just a concern that the neighbors might not know that when an ADU was being built under that program, that it was income restricted. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then a question that we get a lot about is, what about displacement? And are we worried that ADUs will make properties more valuable and neighborhoods less affordable? I have some things I could say about that, but let me just put it out there to Justin and Councilman Hines in the group first.
I'll give Justin first crack at this one.
All right, thank you. Yeah, regarding displacement, we're actually hearing that the ADUs can actually help families stay on the property as property values increase. Families can use the ADU as an extra source of income and kind of help stabilize their income to stay on the property.
Yeah, and that's basically what I would say as well. And is that this is an opportunity for us to have generations stay near each other. I know that even before I was elected in 2019, there were conversations statewide about a lot of people moving from out of state to Colorado, and then once people move here, they realize that their aging parents should they're not getting any younger, and so they want the parents to come to Colorado as well. But we heard time and time again that they don't want the aging parents to live in the same home, and just to have a little bit of privacy and separation. And so that's why a fair amount of people were looking to ADUs rather than in Congress Park as an example. And I keep using the same neighborhood, but in other neighborhoods, it doesn't really make sense for a building to be, or a home to be demolished and rebuilt. So the best way for there to be the ability for families to age in place or to grow as a family is with an ADU.
Thank you, Councilman Hines. Yeah, and I'll just add that, we just really see this as an opportunity for neighborhoods to accommodate some change while protecting the existing structures and their inhabitants. So that's a great opportunity. We have a question that first I'll start with, there's several kind of related questions. Bruce in the Q&A says that he was dismayed that the city council and community planning and development didn't fight the state bill harder to get exempted from the state bill, since Denver had spent 2 years iterating ADUs with its citizens, which was the project. Bruce, I think you participated in that, the ADUs in Denver project, where we made the context sensitive rules that Justin talked about. So others can jump in on this, but I'll start by saying that the state actually doesn't specifically offer an exemption, and there are some potential consequences of not complying with state law. But in addition to that, there was another question about the setbacks in the suburban area, since they impact the size of the ADU, and that's related to this state law question, because one of the things that came out of that community conversation about the rules for ADUs was that it was appropriate to have greater setbacks in the rear of a lot in more suburban contexts, based on there being a higher expectation of privacy and just a lower density of buildings and larger lots typically in those areas. So there's a little more room to move away from the edges of the lots. So the rules that we developed out of that project actually require a 10-foot rear setback for an ADU in those suburban zone districts if it's 1 story, and a 20-foot setback for an ADU if it's 2 stories. And that's significantly more than for ADUs that are in more urban contexts, where it goes down to 5 feet or 0 feet if it's right on an alley. The state law actually says that anything more than a 5-foot rear setback is overly restrictive. We actually haven't proposed to change that because we want to continue to have a conversation with the state legislature legislators about possibilities around that, because we know that was so important to the community conversation. So there is some dialogue still going on about some of this. Councilman Heinstead, I know you're involved in that. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so yeah, Abe, you're right. We are working with our state counterparts, particularly the Denver delegation, as in the state legislators who entirely represent Denver constituents. And the way the state law was crafted in the 2024 session that ended, we asked them for a few amendments, and we got some of those. And then we didn't get a couple of things. And so one of the things was about setbacks. And so to the nature of the question, we continue to fight for the state to realize that we went through a pretty extensive stakeholder process, and also to fight for Denver as a more complicated city than any other city in Colorado. And so that has resonated with some of our state colleagues in the last session. They also, the state law doesn't take effect until the end of the 2025 session. And so that was put into the state law on purpose so that we could then continue to advocate for Denver's approach. And we're already in conversations with the Denver delegation to see if we can make that happen. So to your question, the point of the state bill was to have it apply statewide, and Denver shouldn't be taking all the density. And there are cities that are suburbs of Denver and elsewhere who are intentionally limiting density. But the secret's out. Colorado is a fabulous place to live. The secret's out. Denver is a fabulous place to live, and people keep moving here. So that state law helps Denver, as it is currently written, in requiring that other cities take some gentle density too. But we do continue to advocate at the state legislature for the extensive stakeholder process that we did for ADUs here in Denver.
Thanks, Councilman. A question, there's several questions in the chat related to covenants and HOAs, and whether this means that HOAs have to allow ADUs. And so I'll say that the city does not regulate HOAs. So from the city's perspective, HOAs are allowed to have their own rules. And this zoning amendment does not apply to HOA rules. However, the state does regulate HOAs, and the recent state ADU law says that HOAs must allow ADUs by June 30th of 2025. And so if you live in an HOA that does not allow ADUs, and you or one of your neighbors proposed to build an ADU, and the HOA tried to say no, whoever was trying to build the ADU could potentially have a lawsuit supported by the state law, but that's not something that the city would enforce, because we don't enforce HOA regulations. So we had a question, someone was a little bit confused about the conversation around the side setbacks and bulk plane. And are we saying that the current code will remain the same concerning setbacks and bulk planes, or that it will change if we are able to shift zoning to allow ADUs? The person asking the question says, for example, I live in Marlee and my current zoning does not allow ADUs. According to the current zoning, I'd have to have a pretty shallow roof if I were to build an ADU. Would that still be the case, or would it be a little bit less strict? Justin, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. So to clarify, so the standards that we have in place for detached ADUs are not changing, but when we allow the ADUs within the other zone districts, they are getting that entitlement as well. So in a sense, those zone districts are changing because they are getting the design standards that we already have associated with detached ADUs in the districts that currently allow them. And hopefully that clarifies.
Right. I think the main message is the rules about ADUs are not changing, but when you are allowed to build an ADU, the rules that apply everywhere else in the city are available to you, or in other zone districts that are like yours. So if you live in a suburban zone district now that doesn't allow you to build ADUs, you get those rules for ADUs that apply in suburban districts that do allow them. So you get the allowance to build a 1-story ADU with a 10-foot rear setback, for example, or 2 stories with 20 feet. So there's a question about requirements for owner occupancy. Is there any requirement, or could both the main house and the ADU be rentals? Do you want to start on that, Justin, or would you like me to?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently, the rule that we have in the zoning code is that the owner must occupy either the primary unit or the ADU. And the state law that we cover kind of restricts when a city can require owner occupancy. And it states that it can only be enforced at the time of permitting. And so our Citywide ADUs project is proposing to change the code in order to comply with the state law, and the owner occupancy would only be enforced at the time of permitting. And so after that, both units could be rented out.
Abe,
Yeah, go ahead, Councilman.
there are a couple questions about basically on how expensive ADUs are. Do you mind if I take a stab at those?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So so I see a few people, Antoinette, I think Bruce as well, talk about the cost of ADUs, and you're right. That's it's not a cheap expense, and that is in part the reason why when we look at other cities that have changed their ADU regulations to allow for more ADUs, there isn't just this massive swarm of ADUs in that city. So so I'm kind of answering two questions. The first question I'm answering is, if we pass this, will we suddenly see a million ADUs in the city? And the answer is, if Denver's anything like the other cities who've done this, the answer is no, and in part because of the cost of ADUs. So this proposal doesn't address the cost of ADUs. This does only talk about access to building ADUs, but we are also interested in, I and at least a couple of my council colleagues are interested in other ways to make ADUs more attainable. The mayor has talked about the Affordable Denver 0.5% sales tax could be used to help fund some ADUs. So there's that. But colleagues and I are also talking about the possibility of maybe some ADU templates. So, if you have interest in building an ADU, and the city of Denver could say, here are 3 or 5 or 12, or I don't know, however many, packages for accessory dwelling units. And if you use one of those packages, then you automatically are approved. So basically there would be discussion at the beginning saying, I want to use one of these packages, and then a discussion at the end, just verifying that you did indeed use one of those packages. And so that will be a different conversation that will be, we have to do this first. I guess we have to do it first because we have to have access to the accessory dwelling units. But once we have this legislation, then if we can have those templates, then that would kind of expedite the process. It would save costs with detailed architectural plans. And so we're looking at that, but we wanted to tackle this first.
Thank you, Councilman Hines. And any other panelists, of course, feel free to elevate anything that you're seeing in the Q&A that you'd like to answer. One question that we've heard a lot is, why is this happening now? Anyone want to take that on?
I can give it a go. And because I as one of the sponsors of the bill, and I apologize, I don't mean to monopolize the time. I just happen to be the political voice on the in this particular webinar. The why now, part of the conversation have it happening now is because of the state law. Also, another part of the conversation, or why we're having it now, is that we have seen a bit of inequity. There are people who want accessory dwelling units on their property, and right now it's a patchwork. There might be some neighborhoods that allow for ADUs, some neighborhoods that don't. There might be even it's as refined as, or as complicated as, there might be one home on a block that can build an ADU and another one on that same block that cannot, and so that creates a lot of confusion and an inequity, because someone has to really understand the detailed, complicated zoning code that's here in Denver. So many times, someone who wants to build an ADU then has to hire a consultant who's an expert in zoning, and then and also an expert in the rezoning process. And that is an expensive process. It's a time-consuming process, and that means that most of the people who have applied for ADUs in the last several years are more affluent, and that is that's not okay. We should have the ability to have ADUs throughout our city. So so that's part of the conversation of the state. Part of the conversation is we have seen a lot of rezonings in the last few years for ADUs, and that's an inequitable process. And then we believe that it's the right thing to do for us to basically get government out of the way. This is a bit of bureaucracy, and ensuring that we don't have to have this layer of bureaucracy. You saw the slide, we're getting rid of some of our zoning code just to make it a little easier and more transparent. I think that's an important consideration too. And then the last thing I would say is that every ADU rezoning that has come through council, we've voted to approve. It is in all of our planning documents, Blueprint Denver, and others, that we should encourage and permit ADUs whenever possible. And so it is hard for council to say no to ADUs, and in fact, we've said yes to all of them. So that means that we've got bureaucracy as in community planning and development. There are folks who really have to spend a bunch of time to create a package that they present to planning board and to council, and then council has to consider them, and then we say yes to all of them. So and I would say there was one technical exception where we did vote it down, but it was because of a technical reason, not because of the idea of ADUs. So just seems like if we're going to say yes every time, we might as well just stop having the consideration and just let it automatically be yes.
Thank you, Councilman. Great. And let's see. So we have a question from David saying that Obama, Harris, and Waltz all have emphasized the critical need for cities to produce more housing. that Walz passed laws that help Minneapolis end single-family zoning. When will Denver lead the charge to increase density beyond adding ADUs? I can start with that. So, first I'll say that we don't see this ADU project as ending single-family zoning. We will still have single unit zone districts. That doesn't change. ADUs are considered like just accessory to a single unit. And in those zone districts, they have to be under the same ownership as the primary dwelling unit. However, we do have adopted policy in Blueprint Denver that talks about, in addition to the need for allowing ADUs across the city, the need to have a wider range of housing options in our neighborhood. If you're a planning geek, you've probably heard the term missing middle. It's the kinds of housing that are sort of between a single unit detached house and an apartment building, like duplexes and row houses and some other things we don't have very much of in Denver. We're taking a very incremental approach to our policy guidance, though, and we started out with that project to make sure that we had a conversation about what the rules should for ADUs should be. Now we're moving on with the council sponsors' help to this proposal to allow ADUs across the city. In the future, we would like to have additional conversations about what other housing options could possibly be available and where.
And I'll just add, since David mentioned Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis got rid of single family zoning entirely. And that is a conversation that I've had with a couple of my colleagues as city council colleagues. It's not a unanimous sentiment, I guess is where I would go with that. And so that isn't as easy a conversation as citywide ADUs. There are some council members that are representing their constituents and believe that their constituents feel that Denver's not ready, that Denver should keep single family zoning. But that is certainly, as Abe said, that is a conversation we continue to have, and maybe we certainly would have discussions going forward.
Thank you, Councilman. We so I have a question that says, basically, couldn't an HOA zone out ADUs by setbacks and architectural requirements so they're allowed but effectively can't be done? That's a really good question. And I believe the state law actually says that HOAs need, can't have unreasonable restrictions against ADUs and that they must allow them. However, that's a kind of vague statement where you wouldn't really know when you'd cross the line. I think clearly the intention of the state law is that HOAs allow ADUs and don't have such onerous restrictions that an ADU could never actually be built. But I think that it's possible that that may need to be tested a little bit after the state law goes into effect to find out what it really means.
Yeah, and thanks, Abe, for bringing that up. That was actually part of the state conversation as to why setbacks were not flexible and at the city level, is because they didn't want some sort of political subdivision like a homeowners association to effectively deny ADUs by creating insane restrictions.
And we have a question that is specifically for you, Councilman. If you're willing to,
I don't know, I'm shy.
Make a prognostication about whether the proposed text amendment will pass when it goes in front of the full city council for a public hearing, which is likely to be in November.
That's I mean, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, and I've already I have more than once said that ADUs that council has always unanimously adopted. ADUs, and my colleagues corrected me about that one technicality. And so I know that I'm not excited when one of my members tries to predict my vote. Um, and I would say that the converse is also true, but I would, again, point out that there are we have had unanimous votes about ADUs, either rezoning them individually or as even as large as a neighborhood worth of rezoning, and they've all been unanimous. So it would be difficult for me to understand how we would have a major shift. But I don't want to I don't want to vote for one of my colleagues in advance.
Apologies for putting you in a difficult position, but thank you for answering that. So this is a question that I can at least start answering. So how much of Denver's recent ADU changes will go away, especially for suburban zone districts? So I assume that refers to the state law. And so luckily, with the project that we did to modernize our ADU regulations that was adopted in 2023, we actually got really close to having rules that comply with the new state law. For example, we removed minimum lot sizes, which are not allowed by the state law, and did a few other things that bring us closer to compliance. So actually, there really are only 3 places, I think, where we don't match state law right now. One of them is that we don't allow ADUs everywhere where single unit dwellings are allowed. This project, the main thrust of this project is to change that. So that would be corrected and we would be in compliance. The second is that our owner occupancy restrictions on ADUs don't quite match up with what the state allows. So this citywide ADUs amendment, as Justin described, will propose to tweak that requirement to say that it only applies at the time that an ADU is being built, and that an owner can move away at a later time. And so then we'd also be in compliance with state law there. Then there's the rear setbacks that we talked about before, where particularly in the suburban zone districts, specifically in the suburban zone districts and in the urban edge zone districts, which are the zone districts that start with an E, we have setbacks that are greater than the state allows. We haven't proposed to change those because we know that there was such an important community conversation about that, and we want to take some more time for conversation with the state. But luckily, I think the broad answer to your question is very little will change for zoning across Denver, including in suburban zone districts. And so perhaps I'll also ask a more general question that we hear, which is just, how will this impact my neighborhood? Anyone want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll give it a start. I really think that the contextual design standards will help limit the impact to the neighborhood. And also, we haven't really seen in areas in full neighborhoods that have been rezoned to allow ADUs, we haven't seen everyone take advantage of this, primarily either deciding it's not for them, they don't want to do that on their property, or the cost prohibits too. So it's really as you hear the term gentle density, we do feel like these would blend in with the neighborhood and wouldn't be as impactful as another larger development taking place.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. So particularly last time at the last town hall, we had a lot of questions about fees and Denver's new the Enhancing Housing Affordability Program, and whether those fees would apply to ADUs. And the answer is no, there's actually an exception available for ADUs. Otherwise, the fee, if you were building a single unit house, is $1.75 per square foot of construction, but an ADU can get an exception to that requirement. We have a question from John asking, can you clarify parking requirements for new homes going through permitting versus existing homes adding an ADU? And Jenna, you may be typing a response, but sorry.
No, I was saying you're answering it live. We also have a couple of other questions about parking, so I think a few people will get their answers here.
Okay. Do you want to start to answer, Justin?
Would you be able to repeat the question? I was sidetracked.
Yeah.
The thing.
Sorry. It's about parking requirements for new homes that are going through permitting versus existing homes adding an ADU.
Yeah, so they would be the same, and we don't have parking standards for single family homes or single family properties. So ADUs currently do not have any parking requirements.
And then Sarah Showalter is one of our colleagues at Community Planning and Development. And Sarah, I think you either have a question or want to help answer a question. Are you live? Sarah might not be there. If she gets back, we'll come back to her.
I'm so sorry. I am here. I did not realize I had my hand raised though. I was just listening in. Sorry,
Oh.
guys. You're doing a stellar job. Keep it up.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for joining in.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about parking and the lack of parking requirements for single unit homes or for ADUs. A general question, we've talked a lot about is whether this proposal affects the permitting process for ADUs. And so I can just start with an answer to that. That the new rules that we adopted in 2023 streamlined the rules for ADUs quite a bit, making the process somewhat easier. Then we also have the fact that, right now for homeowners that live in zone districts that don't allow ADUs, that the process can be pretty intense because they have to first go through the whole rezoning process before even beginning the process of permitting their ADU. So this project would address that. There are some other things that this project doesn't directly address, but that we are working on generally to streamline and speed up our permitting process. And also, I think we've mentioned in the question and answer that alongside the state adopting the new ADU laws, they've also created a grant program initially funded with $7 million that communities can apply for. And one of the things that we can use grant money for is to offset fees that people would otherwise have to pay, or to provide like architectural assistance or help with permitting. So all of those things are things that we can look at doing in the future. And Justin or anyone else want to add to that?
No, I think that was good.
I would say that the simpler our code can be, the easier it is for us to have our planners go through the permitting process. So we constantly balance making sure that we don't have a zoning free-for-all in our city, and where we have 60-story buildings going up in Carter's Park, which was something that people were very concerned about back in 2018, 2019. And balancing that with zoning, a zoning code that is so complicated that it slows down the permitting process and makes training new planners and new permit reviewers a longer process because it's so complicated and dense.
Thanks, Councilman. And then Christine is asking about concerns about extra cars and traffic that ADUs could put on the roads, especially if they are used as an Airbnb type rental or short-term rental.
I'll start at least. We have looked at data from other cities who have relaxed the requirements for ADUs, and there hasn't been immediate wide scale of adoptions of ADUs as they've been legalized or the zoning rules have been relaxed. And so while it certainly would hopefully allow for the creation of additional ADUs at a slightly lower price point, the you know, on a particular block, allowing for someone new to live in an ADU should not significantly add to traffic or parking concerns. I don't think you mentioned specifically parking, but that also is a pretty common question that we get. So the ADU by design is not a large building, and so it won't fit that many people anyway. So we haven't seen major traffic congestion changes as a result. When we have said yes to ADUs, and we as in council have said yes to ADU rezonings in the past, and we haven't seen it in other cities.
Great, thanks, Councilman. And then we just had a question come in from Brandon, who says he believes one of the panelists discussed a program or subsidy to assist with ADU construction costs. Would such a program be presented to taxpayers for a vote? I assume Brandon is concerned because taxpayer money might be spent on such a program. So we discussed the program that the Denver Housing Authority is running, and I put a link to that in the answer to another question. And the city has for several years now provided some money for portions of that program. Future money, we're hoping, can come from grants from the state, which has set aside an initial fund of $7 million to communities that comply with the new state ADU rules. Once we get certification that we've complied, we can apply for those grants and then use that money in a variety of ways, as we previously discussed.
And I did mention that Affordable Denver, I think that's what the mayor is calling it, that potential additional help, financial help for building ADUs is one of the many components of the Affordable Denver initiative that the mayor has proposed. It is what City Council referred to the November ballot. So it's the 0.5% affordable housing tax. And so if that, I did mention that earlier. So if that's what you're meaning, then absolutely yes, taxpayers do have the opportunity to vote on that on the November ballot. But I would also say that ADUs are just one small component of a much larger strategy for affordable housing.
Awesome. Thank you, Councilman. Leah asks, can you build 2 ADUs on the same lot as a duplex? So that's a really good question, Leah. The 2023 update that we made to the zoning code addressed one of the policies that had been adopted in Blueprint Denver, which was to look at allowing ADUs as accessory to more housing types than just single unit homes. And so as part of that, we did make it possible for duplex or row houses for each unit to have an ADU, just one. There can be some complication that in many cases, and this is true for me, that I live in a duplex that's actually in a single unit zone district. And there are some special rules around that say that it's not possible to add existing dwelling units. But if you are in a 2-unit zone district or in a row house zone district, and you have like a duplex or a row house unit, you do currently have the ability to add an ADU to your primary unit.
And Abe, if I think you answered this, but just to make sure, so if there are duplex, each side of the duplex is owned by different individuals. Each individual, and it's a lot zoned for duplexes, then each owner can add one ADU. So in effect, the duplex would have 2 ADUs, but they're associated with the owner of the duplex, of each side of the duplex. Am I getting that right?
That's a great clarification, right? It's not that an owner of one of the units gets to build 2 ADUs. It's each of the individual owners gets one. So Michael asks in the Q&A, if an ADU structure has garage space, does that space count towards the maximum square footage? Yeah, that's a really good question. So it is habitable area that is what contributes to the maximum square footages that we mentioned, which are set at 857 square feet or 1,000 square feet, depending on the lot size right now. And so the garage space does not count towards that. So for example, if you had a 500 square foot garage, well, let's say you had a 600 square foot garage right now, and you added a 600 square foot ADU on top of that, that's a 600 square foot ADU that the garage is not counted towards it. And let's see, any other panelists, feel free to note things that are in the Q&A that you'd like to answer while you're looking at that, or go ahead, Councilman.
Oh, no, I was going to ask a question for CPD to answer. Community planning and development, sorry. Does an ADU require a licensed contractor to be built, and or can a homeowner build it themselves? I think Leah's asked this question.
Yeah, so correct me, anyone else that knows if this is wrong, but I believe the only exception to the licensed contractor rule is if you are doing construction on the home that you, on a single unit home that you live in. So I'm pretty sure that does not apply to you then doing the construction on an ADU that you're adding to your property, that you do have to be a licensed contractor in that case.
Understood. Thank you.
And maybe I'll just bring up Cindy's question from the Q&A. Do you have any analysis or projections related to need for more community services to take care of increased density, trash, parking, etc.? And Councilman Hines, it looks like you maybe want to start to answer that.
Oh, I was just making sure that, that you could answer it live, but
I can start if you'd like.
Well, I'm already here. So yeah, in the analysis that that CPD has actually helped provide for us is that this is called gentle density because it is gentle to the surrounding neighborhood, and so when other cities have relaxed restrictions for ADUs, we haven't seen a massive rush to build lots and lots of ADUs in our city. So hopefully we already have built an infrastructure that could allow for another up to 1,000 foot structure be built without overwhelming our infrastructure. And then one thing else that I don't know why I didn't think about this sooner, but another advantage of an ADU, particularly in historic areas, is that the ADU allows for that gentle density, but the street, the view of the neighborhood from the street does not change. So that charm in that historic neighborhood, or the charm in a neighborhood with mature houses, is not affected. So the curb appeal or the street appeal remains the same, yet there's a little bit more density allowed in that neighborhood or street.
Awesome. Thank you, Councilman. So looks like Judith is looking for an answer about property taxes, and she asks, will ADUs be subject to the same property tax rate and terms as the main dwelling? Meaning, will ADUs be included in the property's appraised values and thus added to the tax base? So this is not something that zoning specifically addresses, but the county assessor, periodically assesses the value of properties for purposes of calculating tax rates, and they will take into account improvements that are made on the property. So, whether you add an addition to, add an additional bathroom to your house or something like that, or whether you add an ADU, that's an improvement made on the property that the county assessor will eventually catch up with and revalue the property. Because of course, if you were to sell the property, you would ask for more money because it now has an ADU, or it now has an additional bathroom, or whatever that is. And so it would ultimately, long-term affect the property tax. I do want to note, though, that we have had questions, or we have had conversations with the folks at our assessor's office about the impact of ADUs on the neighborhood in general, because of concerns about, if my neighbors start building ADUs and their properties get more valuable, what's that going to do to my property taxes or my property value? What we hear from the assessors is that they see no impact, because the assessors will only look at their formula looks at comparable properties. And it means that if your property doesn't have an ADU, they're not going to look at properties that do have ADUs when they're calculating what they think the value of your property is. So I hope that helps.
And if I might add a little bit more, so this is at the state level, so outside of the purview of city council, but our governor has called for a special session to be convened specifically about property taxes. I'm not a state legislator, so I don't get to introduce any bills at the state legislative special session, and I don't have easy access to conversations about the legislation that our legislators or our state folks are considering. We have heard that there might be the conversation about ADUs that are used as a business, like, for example, short-term rentals. They might be taxed at a business rate as opposed to a residential rate. So I don't know exactly how that would be implemented, or if it will even be introduced in the special session. But there is a thought that if an ADU is being used for commercial purpose, then it might be taxed as a commercial entity.
Great. Thank you, Councilman. So we have a question from John, who's wondering if this was already answered, but I think we didn't get this specific, John, to your question. You're asking if a home is being built as a spec home and is owned by the builder with an intention to sell, can they include an ADU never having occupied or intended to occupy. So this is a very specific situation, like where new housing is being built, perhaps multiple new houses in one of the parts of the city that's being redeveloped, and that the builder would like to add ADUs with the single family houses that are being built. The state law actually specifically says that we can't require owner occupancy in that situation where the primary house and an ADU are being built at the same time. And you can maybe understand why, is that technically there is no way to live on the property. There's nowhere to live. You're building the first housing that even exists there. And so that's a situation. Basically, the answer is yes, a builder could build a new house with an ADU simultaneously without having occupied it when they get the permit. Wendy asks, she'd started to get bids on adding an ADU to their property, but was looking to plumb from my house. They were later informed that this will require plumbing from the street. Is that the case? And if so, can you help me understand why? That would add another $10,000 at least to my quote and make it no longer affordable. Yeah, Wendy, we hear a lot about infrastructure costs that can come up when building ADUs like this. The zoning change that we've proposed, the zoning doesn't specifically address this, because the zoning is just the rules about what you can build. Whereas these kinds of fees, this particular one you're talking about, I think is one that comes from Denver Water, an independent agency. However, we're in constant conversation with those agencies about ways to go a little bit easier on some of these smaller housing options that are coming in. Right now, they treat it as if you were just adding any kind of housing unit, basically. And oftentimes, that can result in a lot of expense. And, I think we're getting closer to potentially having some options where they would accept connecting into the same existing line for the primary house and things like that.
So it looks like we just have one more open question on here, and I think we could probably answer this one live as well. So essentially the question is from Carolyn asking, can the existing building on a lot be used as the ADU under this change? And so for context, it seems like the existing home on the lot is set back on the property. And if it meets the standards of an ADU, then you could apply for a permit, a zoning permit for an ADU for that structure, and build a primary unit if that primary unit can also meet the standards for an urban home or suburban home. So it is an option. We'd have to look at the specifics of your lot and property to make sure all the standards could be met.
Great, thanks, Justin. Mm-hmm. One question, and panelists, did we answer the question about the old house on the back of the lot in the chat? I think we must have.
Yes, that's what Justin.
Okay, that's the same question. All right, thanks. And then the question from Antoinette about if I use the ADU as an Airbnb, is that considered commercial taxing? Councilman Hines, you may actually be a little bit more on top of this. I think in the past it hasn't been.
And yeah, it's my understanding that it is not currently considered a commercial unit. Where I was, why I brought it up at all is that may be so the governor called a special session for our state legislature, and that starts on Monday. And that may be a topic of conversation with the state legislators on Monday. But it's my understanding that that an ADU is still a residential structure anywhere in Denver, at least. I don't know about elsewhere, but that any ADU being used as a commercial structure or not is still a residential structure. But the General Assembly, the state folks, the state legislature, they might think otherwise. I don't know. That might be a complicated conversation to have in a very compressed time frame. This special session usually only lasts a few days, so they might. I think it is a complicated topic that they might say it's too much for us to accomplish in just a few days. But we don't have direct influence. CPD, Community Planning and Development, doesn't have direct influence, and City Council also doesn't have direct influence of what the state legislature does. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. So I want to thank everyone who's here. I do want to ask, just put out one more call for questions, should you have any. We still have another 10 minutes in our scheduled time for this town hall. I want to thank the 72 people who have used our Q&A function. And I think there were a couple people who maybe used it more than once, but we've gotten quite a few questions, and I think that's great that that we have so many people here and so many people willing to participate and use this as an opportunity to ask questions. I was also trying to fill just a few more seconds in case someone wanted to ask the next question. I do thank you, Leah, for being here. You say thank you for all your time. I would say thank you for all your time. Everyone in the panel is paid for. All of our salaries and benefits are paid by Denver taxpayers. So I want to thank you for participating in our political process. We are all our democracy is stronger when we all participate. So, Jesse, you want to talk a little bit about next steps, and then we can wrap it up?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks everybody for the questions, and just for the next steps. So the next public hearing, on the first public hearing of our process, is planned for September 4th at the Planning Board. And then we will go into the City Council Committee and hopefully to the City Council public adoption hearing in mid-November. We encourage everybody to visit our website for the most current information. And if other questions or comments come up, please use our web form to send them our way, and we'll get you an answer. And thanks everybody for your time tonight.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We're going to give you 8 minutes back. And so thank you for participating, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you so much, everyone.